Starting on day one, I took immediate action to stop the invasion of our southern border.
Masked federal agents making multiple arrests, often followed by protesters.
They keep asking, why are you in our community? And we always say it's to make your community a safer place.
Breaking news is coming out of Minnesota today, and it is an update that completely shifts the narrative on a story the Trump administration and its allies have been trying to spin for weeks. We have two separate, high-stakes legal cases currently unfolding before Judge Kate Menendez, a Biden appointee who has found herself at the center of a massive legal collision. In the last 24 hours, the courtroom has seen intense hearings with both the state of Minnesota and a group of protesters seeking temporary restraining orders against what they describe as extreme tactics and police brutality by ICE agents on the streets of Minnesota.
But for months, masked federal agents have aggressively engaged with protesters in several states while carrying out the president's immigration directives. Shooting pepper balls into faces, using cars to move people, and even employing chokeholds on protesters.
But the most explosive part of this story involves leaked documents that were clearly intended to smear a victim, but have instead completely backfired on the government. Let's talk about Renee Good. For a long time, the narrative pushed by certain politicians was that she was some sort of left-wing agitator or a radical funded by outside interests.
Well, I haven't seen the vice president's statement, but he's generally very accurate. I hate to say, look, I watched that yesterday, and there were a lot of different forms to it. But there was a woman screaming, shame, 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 shame. She was a agitator, probably a paid agitator, but in my opinion, she was an agitator, a very high-level agitator, so professional, she wouldn't stop screaming. I said, this isn't a normal situation. This is a professional troublemaker.
However, new reporting on leaked documents, including newsletters from the Southside Parent Charter School, paints a completely different picture. Renee Good was a social activist, yes, but she was also a mother who served on the school board of a small school devoted to social justice as part of its governing decree. And what happened next didn't just shock the community. It broke the Department of Justice from the inside. If someone leaked these documents to CNN or other outlets hoping to make Renee look dangerous, it had the exact opposite effect. These documents show that the school board and the community were in favor of peaceful protest and what civil rights leaders have long called good trouble. They weren't training people to be violent. They were coaching people on how to monitor ICE, how to use whistles as needed, and how to engage in nonviolent but non-cooperative conduct to challenge the federal government's actions under the First Amendment. The newsletters contained phrases like non-cooperation training and referred to ICE as untrained bullies looking for an easy target. It suggested that neighbors showing up save lives. That is exactly what Renee Good was doing. She was showing up to save lives, and tragically, she lost hers as a result. The government's attempt to paint this as radical dogma that justified her death is falling apart. J.D. Vance even went on record calling her a left-wing agitator who had been weaponized and radicalized. He actually claimed she threw her car in front of ICE officers, but the evidence says otherwise. On the day she was killed, Renee and her wife, Becca Good, had just dropped their 6-year-old child off at school, just 1.5 miles away from where the incident occurred. Teachers and parents at the school described the Goods as a loving family. They would drop their child off with multiple hugs and kisses and drive around the back just to wave one more time. They didn't ram their car into ICE. They didn't block the road. In fact, people were passing in front of and behind them. They never even got out of their car. Yet, according to defense filings and reporting, the government is now investigating the victim. They are targeting Renee Good and her wife Becca rather than investigating the agents involved. This targeting is so egregious that it has caused a massive internal collapse at the Department of Justice. We are now hearing that more than 6 people have quit the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota, led by Joe Thompson. Furthermore, more than 6 leadership figures have resigned from the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division's criminal section. Why? Because the administration's leadership, including Todd Blanche, has already declared that they will not be conducting a criminal civil rights investigation into the agent involved, identified in court filings as Jonathan Ross. How can you decide not to investigate before the investigation is even done? It seems Pam Bondi is nowhere to be found lately, especially after Donald Trump publicly embarrassed the prosecutors during a press conference. Now, we see Todd Blanche stepping in to shut down accountability. Now, let's look at what's happening in Judge Menendez's courtroom. She is not happy with the Department of Justice. On Tuesday, she held a hearing in the case brought by a class of protesters who want ICE to stop using pepper spray, pepper balls, and brandishing firearms to chill First Amendment speech. Judge Menendez wanted to hear from the actual ICE agents who were on the street. She wanted to see the evidence of how the protesters were supposedly acting to justify these tactics. Instead, the DOJ gave her hearsay testimony from field supervisors. They didn't bring the agents. They didn't bring the evidence. The judge made it clear that it is not her job to help the government build its case. If they don't carry their burden of proof, she is going to side with the protesters. And then we have the emergency case brought by Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. This case goes even further than the protesters' suit. Ellison is seeking to stop what he calls the ICE surge and is asking for an order that requires ICE agents to identify themselves and not wear masks, use body cameras, stop using chokeholds and laying hands on First Amendment protesters, and stop the use of pepper spray and brandishing firearms. These two cases, the protesters' case and the state's case, will likely fit together like a hand and a glove to provide protection for citizens' constitutional rights. The reason we see at least a dozen career prosecutors walking away from this administration in protest is because they can't sleep at night. They swore an oath to the Constitution and the principles of federal prosecution. They are being ordered by Main Justice in Washington to victimize the victims. For many, this was the final straw. You cannot go after the family of a murdered victim of police brutality instead of doing what is right. Judge Menendez is expected to rule very soon, possibly by the end of this week. We are watching a systematic attempt to rewrite the story of a tragedy. But thanks to these leaked documents and the integrity of career prosecutors, the truth is coming out. Before we get deeper into the legal mechanics of what's happening in that courtroom, I want to take a step back and explain why this moment matters so much. This is not just about one case or one tragic death. This is about whether the rule of law will hold when a presidential administration decides it wants to protect its own agents at all costs, even when those agents may have violated someone's constitutional rights. This is about whether federal judges will stand up and say, no, you don't get to ignore due process just because it's politically convenient. And this is about whether career prosecutors, the men and women who have dedicated their lives to justice, will continue to enable a system that has lost its moral compass. Let me walk you through what these leaked documents actually revealed, because the details matter enormously. The Southside Parent Charter School is a small educational institution in Minnesota that was founded on principles of social justice and community engagement. It's not some shadowy organization. It's a school where parents send their kids to learn reading, math, science, and also to understand their role as citizens in a democracy. The school board, on which Renee Good served, sent out regular newsletters to parents. These newsletters talked about upcoming events, academic achievements, and yes, they also discussed the community's concerns about immigration enforcement in their neighborhood. When ICE began conducting what many in the community saw as aggressive and intimidating operations, the school board decided to educate parents about their rights. They explained that under the First Amendment, citizens have the right to observe law enforcement activities in public spaces. They explained that people could use their phones to record interactions, that they could blow whistles to alert neighbors, and that they could engage in what the civil rights movement has always called nonviolent resistance. This is not radical. This is not dangerous. This is civics education. This is teaching people that they have power, that they have rights, and that those rights don't disappear just because a federal agent is standing in front of them. The newsletters specifically trained community members on non-cooperation techniques. What does that mean? It means teaching people that they don't have to answer questions from ICE agents if they don't want to. It means teaching people that they can stand at a distance and observe what's happening without interfering. It means teaching people that if they see something that looks wrong, they have the right to document it, to speak about it, to organize around it. These are foundational democratic principles. If you believe in the Constitution, you believe in these rights. But here's where the government's strategy gets truly cynical. Someone, and we don't know exactly who yet, but the circumstantial evidence points to someone within the federal law enforcement apparatus, leaked these newsletters to media outlets. The clear intent was to make Renee Good look like she was part of some kind of extremist organization. The intent was to suggest that her death was somehow her own fault, because she had been radicalized by this supposedly dangerous ideology. The intent was to shift the narrative away from what actually happened that day and toward a story about left-wing agitators who were asking for trouble. But the plan backfired spectacularly. When journalists actually read these newsletters, when legal analysts actually examined the language, when civil rights advocates actually looked at the training materials, they didn't see radicalization. They saw a community trying to protect itself. They saw a school board trying to empower parents with knowledge. They saw exactly the kind of civic engagement that should be celebrated in a healthy democracy, not demonized. The newsletters didn't advocate violence, they advocated visibility. They didn't tell people to attack ICE agents. They told people to be witnesses. They didn't encourage law breaking. They encouraged law using, exercising constitutional rights that every American possesses. Now let's talk about what actually happened on the day Renee Good was killed, because the gap between the government's narrative and the facts on the ground is enormous. According to multiple witnesses, including teachers at the school, parents in the neighborhood, and other community members who were present, Renee and Becca Good had just completed their normal morning routine. They dropped their 6-year-old child off at school. Multiple people described watching them say goodbye with hugs and kisses, then watching them drive around to the back of the school to wave one more time through the car window. This is what loving parents do. This is what countless families do every single morning in every single community across this country. After leaving the school, the Goods were driving through their neighborhood when they encountered an ICE operation. Here's what we know from witness testimony and from video footage that has been reviewed by attorneys in the case. The Goods' car was on a public street. Other vehicles were moving around them, some in front, some behind. The street was not blocked. Traffic was flowing. The Goods never got out of their car. They never approached ICE agents on foot. They never made physical contact with anyone. They were simply in their vehicle, on a public road, in their own neighborhood. And yet an ICE agent, identified in court filings as Jonathan Ross, discharged his weapon. Renee Good was struck and killed. Her wife Becca was in the car with her. Their 6-year-old child was less than 2 miles away at school, having just been dropped off minutes earlier. A family was destroyed in an instant. And the question that Judge Menendez and the American public deserve an answer to is very simple. Why? Under what legal authority? Under what threat assessment? Under what possible justification does a federal agent fire into a vehicle on a residential street when that vehicle is not ramming anyone, not blocking anyone, not threatening anyone? The administration's answer has been to investigate Renee and Becca Good. Think about that for a moment. A woman is killed by a federal agent, and the response from the Department of Justice is to investigate the victim and her spouse. Not to investigate the shooting itself with the full resources of the Civil Rights Division, not to conduct an immediate and transparent review of whether the use of force was justified, not to place the agent on administrative leave pending a thorough investigation. Instead, the DOJ decided to build a case that would justify the shooting after the fact by painting Renee Good as someone who deserved what happened to her. This is where we get to the mass resignations and why they matter so much. Career prosecutors at the Department of Justice are not political appointees. They don't serve at the pleasure of the president. They're not there to advance an administration's agenda. They're there because they believe in the law, because they took an oath to the Constitution, because they believe that justice should be blind to politics and power. These are people who have prosecuted gang members, drug cartels, corrupt politicians, corporate fraudsters. They've seen the worst of humanity, and they've maintained their commitment to doing things the right way, by the book, according to the law. But what's happening in Minnesota has broken something fundamental inside the Department of Justice. When Todd Blanche, who now leads the criminal division, announced that there would be no criminal civil rights investigation into the shooting of Renee Good, he didn't wait for the facts to be gathered. He didn't wait for witnesses to be interviewed. He didn't wait for forensic analysis to be completed. He simply declared that the investigation wouldn't happen. That's not how the justice system is supposed to work. That's not how career prosecutors are trained to operate. That's not what they signed up for. So they started walking away. First, it was more than 6 people from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota. These are the prosecutors who would normally handle any federal case arising in that state. They looked at what they were being asked to do, which was to build a case against the victims instead of investigating the shooting itself. And they said no. They resigned. Then, more than 6 leadership figures in the Civil Rights Division's criminal section followed. These are some of the most experienced civil rights prosecutors in the entire federal government. They've handled cases involving police brutality, hate crimes, voting rights violations. They know what a legitimate civil rights investigation looks like, and they know what a cover-up looks like. And they decided they couldn't be part of this. The total number is now at least a dozen career prosecutors who have either resigned or announced their intention to resign. That's not normal turnover. That's not retirement. That's not people leaving for better paying jobs in the private sector. This is a mass exodus of people who have reached their breaking point. These prosecutors are sending a message, and that message is clear. We will not be complicit in victimizing the victims. We will not use the power of the federal government to protect agents who may have violated someone's constitutional rights. We will not abandon the principles that brought us to this work in the first place. Now let's turn to what's happening in Judge Menendez's courtroom, because this is where the rubber meets the road. She has two cases in front of her, and both of them are asking her to restrain ICE from continuing certain practices in Minnesota. The first case was brought by a class of protesters. These are people who have been out on the streets exercising their First Amendment rights to observe ICE operations, to express their opposition to certain enforcement tactics, and to support members of their community who are being targeted. According to the complaint and the testimony that's been presented in court, ICE agents have responded to these protesters by using pepper spray, firing pepper balls, brandishing firearms, and engaging in other intimidation tactics designed to make people afraid to exercise their constitutional rights. This is what judicial independence looks like. Judge Menendez is not intimidated by the fact that she's going up against the federal government. She's not worried about political backlash. She's doing her job, which is to apply the law fairly and to protect constitutional rights. And the signal she's sending to the DOJ is unmistakable. If you want to defend these tactics, you're going to have to actually defend them with real evidence and real testimony, not with hearsay and vague assertions about public safety. What we're seeing here is a collision between power and principle. The Trump administration came into office with a promise to crack down on illegal immigration, and they've empowered ICE to conduct aggressive enforcement operations. But power doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's constrained by law, by the Constitution, by the checks and balances that are built into our system. When ICE agents use excessive force, when they intimidate people who are exercising First Amendment rights, when they kill someone who posed no threat, they're not just violating policy, they're violating constitutional rights that every person in this country possesses. And that's where judges like Kate Menendez come in. She's a Biden appointee, yes, but that's not why she's ruling the way she's ruling. She's ruling based on the evidence, based on the law, based on the Constitution. She's asking the government to justify its actions, and the government is failing to meet that burden. She's asking for real evidence, and the government is offering hearsay. She's asking for accountability, and the government is offering excuses. The prosecutors who are resigning understand all of this. They understand that their role is not to be cheerleaders for law enforcement. Their role is to ensure that the law is applied fairly, that rights are protected, that justice is done even when it's politically inconvenient. They understand that investigating the victim of a police shooting instead of investigating the shooting itself is a perversion of everything they were trained to do. They understand that when they stay silent, when they continue to cash their paychecks and follow orders that violate their conscience, they become complicit in injustice. So they're walking away, and their departure is going to be felt. These are experienced prosecutors who know how to build cases, who have relationships with law enforcement agencies, who understand the complex intersection of federal and state law. When a dozen of them leave at once, it creates a vacuum. It signals to everyone watching that something is fundamentally broken. It puts pressure on the prosecutors, who remain to ask themselves whether they can continue to be part of this system. The leaked documents that were supposed to destroy Renee Good's reputation have instead become evidence of a community's resilience and a government's desperation. The newsletters from the school board show a group of people trying to protect themselves and their neighbors within the bounds of the law. They show people who believed in their rights and weren't afraid to exercise them. They show exactly the kind of civic engagement that makes democracy work. And the fact that someone thought these documents would be damaging, that someone thought teaching people about their constitutional rights would make them look radical, tells you everything you need to know about how far from democratic norms this administration has strayed. Judge Menendez is expected to rule very soon, possibly by the end of this week. When she does, her decision will reverberate far beyond Minnesota. Other judges around the country are watching. Other communities are watching. Other prosecutors are watching. If she issues strong orders that restrain ICE and protect constitutional rights, it will embolden others to stand up as well. If she backs down in the face of government pressure, it will send a different message. But based on everything we've seen from her courtroom, based on her questions, based on her clear frustration with the government's failure to present real evidence, it seems very likely that she's going to side with the protesters and with the state of Minnesota. This is how the system is supposed to work. This is what checks and balances look like in practice. This is what happens when judges do their job, when prosecutors follow their conscience, when communities organize to protect their rights. It's messy, it's slow, it's frustrating, but it's the only way we have to ensure that power doesn't become tyranny, that law enforcement doesn't become oppression, that tragedy doesn't get rewritten as justified force. Renee Good should be alive today. She should be dropping her child off at school, attending school board meetings, organizing her community, living her life. Her death was a tragedy, and it deserves a full, fair, and honest investigation. The career prosecutors who are walking away from the Department of Justice understand that. Judge Menendez understands that. And increasingly, the American public understands that too.